The hotel confirmation email sat open on my laptop screen, the cursor blinking over the cancel button. My sister's voice echoed through the phone pressed against my ear, that practiced tone of desperation she'd perfected over the years. "Mom, please, just this once. The cruise leaves tomorrow and we can't find anyone else." I stared at that confirmation. 3 months of overtime shifts, skipped lunches, a second job on weekends, all condensed into one glorious week in Charleston. My finger hovered over the mouse. Behind me, my suitcase stood packed and ready by the door, mocking me with possibility. "I'll call you back," I whispered, and the line went dead before she could protest. The metallic taste of adrenaline flooded my mouth as I grabbed my phone and did something I'd never done before. I blocked every single family member's number, one by one, watching their names disappear from my screen like ghosts. Then I closed the laptop, walked to my car, and drove away from Detroit without looking back. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back 3 months earlier, to the day I decided my life was worth more than being their permanent unpaid childcare. It started on a Tuesday morning in late January. I was 52 years old, working double shifts at the automotive parts warehouse and picking up weekend hours at a local bakery. The Michigan winter pressed against the windows of my small apartment, frost creating intricate patterns that reminded me of prison bars. My daughter Melissa called at 6 in the morning, her voice bright and cheerful in a way that immediately set my nerves on edge. "Mom, great news! Derek got promoted, so we're taking the kids to Disney for spring break." I mumbled congratulations through the fog of exhaustion, still in my uniform from the night shift. "That's wonderful, honey." There was a pause, the kind that precedes a trap. "So we were thinking, since you always say you never get to spend quality time with the grandkids, this would be perfect for you to watch them for the week." I sat up slowly, my back protesting from hours of standing. The apartment was cold. I kept the thermostat low to save money. Another small sacrifice in a lifetime of them. Through the window, I could see my neighbor loading his kids into a warm car, heading off to school drop-off like a normal parent who didn't rely on free labor from exhausted relatives. "What week exactly?" I asked, though something in my gut already knew the answer. "April 15th through the 22nd. The dates hit me like ice water. I'd been planning my Charleston trip for months, had researched every historic site, every restaurant, every walking tour. It was supposed to be my first real vacation in 8 years. The last time I'd gone anywhere was to my ex-husband's funeral, and that hardly counted as leisure. I had a Pinterest board with 73 pins. I'd watched YouTube walking tours of the historic district so many times I'd memorized the street names. I'd even practiced saying, "Yes, I'll have the she-crab soup," in front of the bathroom mirror, imagining myself as the kind of woman who traveled alone and ordered regional specialties without apologizing for taking up space. "Melissa, I can't. I'm going to Charleston that week." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. "You're what?" Her tone shifted, disbelief mixing with something sharper. "Since when do you take vacations?" Since I realized I was going to die in this city without ever seeing the ocean again, I wanted to scream. Since I understood that at 52, I had maybe 20 good years left if I was lucky, and I'd spent 30 of them being everyone's solution to their problems. "I've been saving for 3 months, I said instead, keeping my voice steady. "I already booked the hotel. Mom, come on, you can go to Charleston anytime. The kids are only young once." That phrase. How many times had I heard variations of that phrase? "Your father needs you. He's only dying once." "Your sister needs help with the wedding. She's only getting married once." "Your brother needs to borrow money. It's only bankruptcy once." Each time, my needs dissolving into the background like sugar in hot water, sweetening everyone else's life while leaving nothing solid for myself. I know what you're thinking right now, listening to this. You're wondering why I didn't just say no and hang up. But family dynamics aren't that simple, are they? It's like being slowly boiled alive. You don't notice the temperature rising until you're already cooked. "I'll think about it," I told Melissa, which was code for, "I'm going to let you guilt me into this like I always do." But this time something was different. After I hung up, I sat in my dim apartment and looked around at my life. The walls were covered with photos of grandchildren I saw every week, but somehow never got credit for raising. My furniture was 15 years old, worn down from use, but never replaced, because there was always someone else who needed the money more. My closet held 3 pairs of jeans and a rotation of work uniforms. I owned nothing beautiful, nothing impractical, nothing that screamed I am alive and I matter. I walked to the kitchen and made coffee in the same chipped mug I'd been using for a decade. The handle had broken off years ago, but I'd never bought a replacement. Why would I? It still held coffee. Function over form, practicality over pleasure. That had been my entire existence distilled into a handleless mug. I remembered when I'd bought this mug. Actually, it was from a set of 4, a housewarming gift I'd given myself when Tom and I first moved into our house. The other 3 had broken over the years, casualties of family dinners and rushed mornings. This one survived, handleless and scarred, holding on out of sheer stubbornness, kind of like me. I pulled up my bank account on my phone. The Charleston Fund sat there. $2,347. Every penny represented a sacrifice. The lunch I didn't buy, the movie I didn't see, the shoes I wore until the soles separated from the leather. I had calculated it would give me 7 days of moderate comfort, enough to feel like a person who deserved nice things. My phone buzzed. A text from my son, Marcus. Hey Ma, heard about Melissa's Disney trip. You watching the kids? Because Karen and I need you that same week for our anniversary cruise. We already paid the deposit. I stared at that message until the words blurred. They'd already paid the deposit, meaning they'd planned this, counted on me, never bothered to ask if I was available. The assumption that I would always be available felt like a physical weight on my chest. I set the mug down and noticed my hands were shaking. Not from cold, from something else entirely. A rage so profound, it felt like it was coming from my bones, from every cell that had ever been dismissed or diminished or told to wait its turn while everyone else lived their lives. Another text came through, this one from my sister Janet. Michael told me you might bail on babysitting. Please don't do that to Melissa. Family is supposed to help family. I hadn't told Michael anything. Melissa had clearly already activated the family phone tree, rallying the troops to apply pressure. This was their standard operating procedure, refined over decades. Isolate the target, apply guilt from multiple angles, wait for capitulation. I'd watched them do it to our mother before she passed. I'd done it to myself for so long I couldn't remember what it felt like to want something without immediately calculating whose needs would override mine. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to a bookstore, not to buy a gift for someone else, but to browse for myself. The warmth hit me as I walked in, along with the smell of coffee from the cafe and the particular scent of new books, paper and ink and possibility. I wandered the aisles without purpose, letting my fingers trail along spines, reading titles that promised adventure, transformation, escape. A woman about my age sat in one of the reading chairs, completely absorbed in a travel memoir, a latte steaming beside her. She looked content. She looked like she belonged to herself. I wanted that so badly it made my chest ache. I found myself in the travel section, running my fingers along glossy covers showing destinations I'd only seen in other people's vacation photos. A book about Charleston caught my eye. The cover showed Rainbow Row, those famous pastel houses standing proud against a blue sky. I bought it with cash, feeling like a criminal, and read it cover to cover that night in bed. Every page was a promise. Historic mansions, cobblestone streets, the harbor where the Civil War began, restaurants where you could eat shrimp and grits while watching the sunset. I'd grown up in Detroit, spent my whole life surrounded by concrete and industry. The closest I'd been to the ocean was Lake Michigan, and even that I'd only seen a handful of times. Charleston represented something I couldn't quite name. Romance, maybe. History. The sense that the world was bigger and more beautiful than the small corner I'd carved out for myself. But that book also awakened something else. Anger. Why did wanting this make me selfish? Why was my desire for 7 days of peace considered less important than my daughter's desire for a vacation she could easily afford a babysitter for? Derek made 6 figures as an engineer. They lived in a house twice the size of my apartment. They drove new cars while I nursed my 12-year-old sedan along with prayer and duct tape. Over the next 2 weeks, the pressure intensified in ways that felt both predictable and suffocating. Melissa called daily, her requests becoming demands. "Mom, I already told the kids you'd be there. They're so excited." Each call lasted longer than the last, her voice oscillating between pleading and accusatory. She'd bring up memories from her childhood, how I'd always been there for her, how she was just trying to give her kids the same security. The manipulation was so smooth, I could feel myself wavering, feel my resolve weakening with every "remember when." Marcus sent me a long email about how his marriage was struggling, and this cruise was their last chance to reconnect, and wasn't family more important than some selfish trip? I read that email 3 times, each reading revealing new layers of guilt. He painted a picture of his crumbling relationship, of Karen's unhappiness, of how much they'd sacrificed for the kids. And there it was again, the implication that my needs were selfish, trivial, dismissible. His marriage problems somehow became my responsibility to solve. Janet started posting on Facebook about the importance of grandparents in child development, tagging me in articles about how grandmother involvement correlated with childhood success. She wasn't subtle about it. Every post felt like a public shaming, a passive-aggressive billboard announcing my failures. Friends from church started reaching out, asking if everything was okay, if I needed to talk. The whisper campaign had begun. My cousin Rachel, who I hadn't spoken to in months, called to say she heard I was being difficult, and maybe I should remember who helped me when Tom left. That call stung worse than the others. Rachel had been there during the divorce, had let me cry on her couch, had loaned me money when I was desperate. And now she was weaponizing that kindness, using my moment of vulnerability as leverage. The message was clear. You owe us. You'll always owe us. Your debt can never be repaid. They were all so convinced of their righteousness. In their minds, I was the villain of this story. The selfish grandmother choosing a vacation over her family. None of them stopped to calculate what I'd already given. None of them added up the thousands of hours of free childcare, the missed job opportunities because I couldn't work evenings when they needed a sitter, the relationships I'd never pursued because I was always on call. One particularly low moment came when Melissa showed up at my apartment unannounced with the kids. Emma and Connor ran to hug me, their small bodies warm and trusting, and Melissa stood in the doorway with her arms crossed. "The kids wanted to see you," she said, but her eyes told a different story. This was a strategic deployment, emotional warfare using my own grandchildren as weapons. Emma climbed into my lap and asked, "Grandma, are you going to stay with us when Mommy goes on vacation?" I looked at Melissa over Emma's head. "Honey, Grandma has her own vacation that week," I said gently, "but we'll have a special day together before I go, okay?" Emma's face fell, and Melissa's expression turned triumphant. "See what you're doing?" her face said. "See how you're hurting them?" But I also saw something else. Connor playing with a new tablet that probably cost $300. Emma wearing designer sneakers I recognized from the mall. These children weren't suffering. They were being used, trained in the same manipulation tactics that had controlled me for decades. There's a psychology term for this kind of manipulation. It's called gaslighting, and it's insidious. They were rewriting reality, making me doubt my own perception of what was fair. I started keeping a notebook, documenting every request, every assumption, every time someone scheduled me without asking. The numbers were staggering. In the past year alone, I'd provided childcare an average of 3 days per week. At the going rate for babysitters in Detroit, I'd donated roughly $18,000 of my labor. $18,000. I could have paid off my car. I could have fixed the leak in my ceiling. I could have done 100 things that would have improved my quality of life. Instead, I'd subsidized my children's lifestyle choices while my own life remained static, frozen in the same struggle I'd been trapped in since the divorce. Medical studies prove that chronic stress from family exploitation causes measurable harm. Elevated cortisol levels, increased risk of heart disease, depression, anxiety. I was living proof. My doctor had recently prescribed blood pressure medication and asked about my stress levels. When I tried to explain, she'd looked at me with such pity I'd almost started crying right there in the examination room. "You need to set boundaries," she'd said, as if it were that simple. As if saying no to your family didn't feel like carving out pieces of your own heart. But something was shifting inside me. Maybe it was turning 52 and realizing that 60 wasn't that far away. Maybe it was exhaustion so profound I could feel it in my bones. Maybe it was just the accumulation of 1,000 small indignities finally reaching critical mass. I looked at that Charleston book every night before bed, and I made a decision. I was going. No matter what they said, no matter how much they guilted me, no matter what consequences came. For once in my life, I was going to choose myself. The morning I bought my plane ticket, my hands shook so badly I could barely type in my credit card information. It felt like jumping off a cliff. I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, cursor hovering over the purchase button. This was real money. Money I'd earned through back-breaking work, through sacrifices large and small. What if something happened? What if my car broke down? What if there was an emergency? The practical voice in my head, the one that had kept me safe and small for so long, screamed at me to wait, to reconsider, to choose security over desire. But I clicked the button anyway. The confirmation appeared on screen, and I felt something crack open in my chest. Not breaking. Opening. Like a seed splitting to allow growth. The confirmation email arrived, and I printed it out, tucked it into my wallet like a talisman. Proof that I was real. Proof that I mattered. Proof that I deserved beautiful things. Then I made my second decision. I wasn't going to tell them until the last possible moment. No advance notice meant no time for them to coordinate their attack. No opportunity for them to wear me down over weeks. Just a simple announcement, delivered when it was too late to change anything. I know some of you listening are thinking I should have been honest from the start, that I should have had a calm, mature conversation about boundaries and expectations. And you're right. In an ideal world, that's exactly what I should have done. But this wasn't an ideal world. This was a family that had spent decades training me to prioritize their needs above my own, and breaking that conditioning required strategy, not just courage. The weeks crawled by with excruciating slowness, each day feeling like a battle between who I'd always been and who I was trying to become. I worked my shifts at the warehouse, the repetitive motions of sorting and packing, giving me time to think, to rehearse conversations, to strengthen my resolve. My coworkers noticed I was quieter than usual, lost in my own thoughts. "You okay, Clara?" my supervisor asked one afternoon. I almost told him everything, almost spilled the whole story right there among the shipping boxes and conveyor belts. Instead, I just smiled and said I was fine. How could I explain that I was planning a prison break from my own family? I saved every spare dollar with obsessive precision. I stopped buying coffee on my breaks, brought sad little sandwiches from home, walked instead of driving when I could. Every penny that didn't go to rent or bills went into the Charleston Fund. I watched the number grow with a mixture of pride and terror. This money represented freedom, but it also represented a choice I'd have to defend. Late at night, when the apartment was dark and quiet, I watched Charleston videos on YouTube. I became a virtual expert on a city I'd never visited. I learned about the angel oak tree, 400 years old and still growing, its massive limbs stretching toward the sky with patient determination. I felt a kinship with that tree, ancient, weathered, still reaching. I marked restaurants on a map, planned which historic homes I'd tour, memorized the layout of the historic district until I could walk its streets in my mind. I bought a new sundress on clearance, the first piece of clothing I'd purchased for myself in 2 years that wasn't a work uniform. It was pale yellow with tiny flowers, impractical and beautiful. I hung it in my closet and looked at it every morning, a reminder of the promise I'd made to myself. Sometimes I'd try it on late at night, standing in front of my bathroom mirror, trying to see myself as the kind of woman who wore sundresses in Charleston. The woman in the mirror looked hopeful. She looked scared. She looked ready. Every time my phone rang, my stomach clenched. I'd let most calls go to voicemail, screening for emergencies. The messages piled up. Melissa, wondering why I was being distant. Marcus, annoyed that I wasn't responding to his texts. Janet, concerned that I seemed stressed and maybe I needed to come over for dinner so we could talk. They smelled the shift in me. They knew something was wrong. Predators always sense when their prey starts to fight back. 2 weeks before the trip, I had a close call. I was at the grocery store when I ran into Melissa and the kids. My granddaughter Emma, who was 6, launched herself at me with the kind of pure joy that makes your heart hurt. "Grandma, Mommy said you're staying with us for a whole week while they go to Disney." I froze, the words jamming in my throat. Melissa stood behind Emma, her expression challenging me to contradict her daughter. To be the bad guy who ruined a child's excitement. It was a master manipulation. Either I crushed Emma right there in the cereal aisle, or I let the lie stand. I bent down to Emma's level, my knees protesting. "Honey, your mom made a mistake. I can't stay that week. I have a trip planned." Emma's face fell. "But Mommy promised." I looked up at Melissa, whose expression had gone cold and hard. "We need to talk," she said. We left Emma with her brother by the cart and walked to the produce section. Melissa turned on me with barely contained fury. "What the hell, Mom? You're really going to do this? You're going to disappoint your granddaughter for some stupid vacation?" "I told you 3 months ago I couldn't do it," I said, my voice shaking but holding steady. "You chose not to believe me." "You're being incredibly selfish. Do you understand that? Dad would be ashamed of you." Bringing up Tom was a low blow. My ex-husband, who'd left me for a woman half his age and died of a heart attack 3 years later, had many flaws, but weaponizing his memory was beyond pale. Something inside me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. "Your father," I said quietly, "spent 20 years treating me like an accessory to his life. I will not let you do the same." I walked away before she could respond, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. Behind me, I heard her sharp intake of breath, the beginning of a response I didn't stay to hear. I left my cart where it stood and drove home, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. That night, the family group chat exploded. Melissa had reported our conversation, naturally painting herself as the victim of my unreasonable behavior. Messages flew back and forth, a Greek chorus of condemnation. Marcus said I was having a midlife crisis. Janet said I needed therapy. My brother Michael, who I hadn't heard from in 6 months, suddenly appeared to lecture me about family values. Rachel posted a long message about how our grandmother would be rolling in her grave. I watched the notifications pile up, feeling strangely detached. It was like watching a storm from inside a shelter. Their words couldn't touch me anymore. I'd crossed some invisible threshold, and there was no going back. I opened a new message to the group chat. My fingers moved across the keyboard with steady purpose. "I am going to Charleston on April 15th. This is not up for discussion. I will not be available for babysitting, emergency calls, or family drama. I need you all to respect this boundary. I love you, but I also love myself, and I'm done apologizing for that." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then I muted the chat and blocked notifications. Whatever they said after that, I didn't want to know. Let them rage into the void. I was done being their audience. The silence that followed was profound. No calls, no texts, no concerned visits. They were freezing me out, using silence as punishment. And for the first time in my life, I recognized it for what it was. A gift. This is what freedom felt like. Terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The week before the trip, I got strategic. I'd learned something over the years. When people think they can manipulate you, they get sloppy. They assume you'll break. They count on your conditioning. so I let them think they were winning. I unblocked the family chat and sent a casual message about work being stressful, nothing about Charleston. I answered a few calls, kept my voice neutral and tired. I was playing a role I'd perfected over decades, the overwhelmed mother who could be worn down with enough pressure. Marcus took the bait first. He called on Tuesday, his voice warm and conciliatory. "Hey, Ma, I know things got heated. Maybe we all overreacted. Why don't you come over for dinner this weekend? Karen's making that pot roast you love." I accepted because refusing would have raised suspicion. I showed up on Saturday with a store-bought pie and a smile, played with the grandkids, complimented Karen's cooking. I was the picture of normalcy. While Marcus loaded the dishwasher, Karen cornered me in the living room. "We really do need you for that anniversary cruise," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "I know you want to go to Charleston, but couldn't you postpone? Go in the summer instead?" "Maybe," I said, non-committal. "Let me think about it." She smiled, satisfied. She thought she'd won. They all thought they'd won. On my way out, I hugged Marcus and made sure my voice was warm when I said goodbye. In my car, I sat for a moment, my hands on the steering wheel, and felt nothing but cold determination. They'd taught me how to play this game. Now I was just using their own tactics against them. Sunday morning, Melissa called. "Mom, I'm sorry about the grocery store. I was stressed about trip planning. Can we start over?" "Of course, honey," I said, making my voice soft and forgiving. "I understand. So you'll watch the kids?" "We'll talk about it." Another non-answer, another door left open just enough to keep her hopeful. I was becoming my own detective, documenting everything. Every phone call got a time-stamped note in my journal. Every text was screenshotted and saved to a cloud folder. I was building a case, not for them, but for myself. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that the gaslighting was real. American statistics indicate that nearly 5% of seniors suffer psychological abuse every year, and most of it comes from family members who feel entitled to their time and resources. I read articles about elder exploitation, about the ways adult children manipulate aging parents. I saw my own story reflected back at me in 100 different versions. Each one validated what I'd been feeling but couldn't name. I wasn't alone. I wasn't crazy. I was part of a pattern so common it had its own Wikipedia page. Wednesday night, 3 days before my flight, Janet called with a new strategy. "Mom, I talked to everyone. We want to make this right. What if we all pitched in and sent you on a trip? Later in the year, when it's more convenient for everyone." It was tempting. God, it was tempting. The idea that they cared, that they wanted to give me something, that maybe this could all be resolved without conflict. But I'd read about this too. The promise of future rewards to modify present behavior. The carrot that never quite materializes. "That's really sweet," I told her. "Let's talk about it when I get back from Charleston." There was a pause. "So you're still going?" "Yes." The word came out harder than I'd intended. "Janet, I'm going. I've worked too hard for this." "Fine," she said, and hung up. I sat in my apartment that night and felt the walls closing in. The pressure was building. They were running out of time to change my mind, and I could feel their desperation mounting. I knew what was coming next. The final assault, the big guns, the one play they'd been holding in reserve. It came on Thursday. All 5 of them showed up at my apartment unannounced. Melissa, Marcus, Janet, Michael, and Karen. They'd coordinated, probably through a separate chat I wasn't part of. They stood in my living room like an intervention panel, and I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. "We need to talk about your behavior," Janet began, her voice dripping with concern. "We're worried about you. This isn't like you. This isn't like you." The ultimate manipulation, suggesting that standing up for myself was evidence of mental instability, implying that the real me was the doormat they'd grown comfortable with. I let them talk. I sat on my worn couch and listened to them explain all the ways I was being selfish, unreasonable, hurtful. I watched them perform their carefully rehearsed speeches, and I felt absolutely nothing. When they finished, I stood up and walked to my bedroom. They followed, confused, as I opened my closet and pulled out my suitcase. I'd already packed. "I'm leaving tomorrow," I said calmly. "I need you all to go now." "Mom," Melissa started. "No." The word came out like a gunshot. No more. No more guilt. No more manipulation. No more pretending that my needs don't matter. I have given you everything for 30 years, and I am taking 1 week for myself. If you can't accept that, then we have a bigger problem than babysitting. "You're being ridiculous," Marcus said. "We just want what's best for you." "Then let me go to Charleston." Silence fell over the room. They looked at each other, searching for a new angle, a different approach. They were so used to winning this battle that my resistance genuinely confused them. "What happened to you?" Melissa whispered. "You used to care about family." That one hurt. I won't lie, but I'd armored myself for it. "I still care about family," I said. "I'm just done caring about them more than I care about myself." They left finally, with varying degrees of anger and disappointment. The door closed behind them, and I stood in my empty apartment, shaking with adrenaline. I'd done it. I'd stood my ground. But the night wasn't over. At 11 p.m., my phone rang, an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Detroit Memorial Hospital. Your daughter Melissa was brought in by ambulance. She's asking for you." My blood turned to ice. Every maternal instinct I possessed screamed at me to run, to go, to be there. But something made me pause. "What's the nature of her emergency?" "I'm not at liberty to discuss patient details over the phone, ma'am. But she specifically requested we call you." The professional veneer was cracking. The nurse sounded uncomfortable, evasive. "Can I speak to her?" A pause. "She's being examined right now. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I hung up, my hands trembling, and sat down hard on my couch. "Think," I told myself. "Think. Why would the hospital call me and not Derek? Why would they use an unknown number instead of the hospital's main line? Why did the nurse sound so uncertain?" I called the hospital's main line, the number I'd memorized from years of family emergencies. "Detroit Memorial, how can I direct your call?" "I'm trying to confirm a patient admission. Melissa Patterson, brought in tonight." Typing sounds. "I'm not showing anyone by that name admitted this evening." My heart stopped, then started again with a different rhythm. Rage. Pure, undiluted rage. "Thank you," I managed, and hung up. They'd faked a medical emergency. They'd weaponized my love for my daughter to try to break me one last time. It was so far beyond the pale that I couldn't even process it. I should have been devastated. Instead, I felt clarity crystallize inside me like ice. This was who they were. This was what they'd been willing to do. I picked up my phone and did something I'd never imagined I'd do. I blocked every single one of them. Not muted. Blocked. Their numbers, their social media, their emails. I created a wall of silence between us and felt nothing but relief. Then I called my supervisor at the warehouse and used a week of vacation time I'd been hoarding for emergencies. I called the bakery and quit on the spot. I didn't need that second job anymore. I needed my sanity more than I needed the extra $200 a week. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by my window, watching the Detroit streets, and thought about all the versions of myself I'd killed to keep them happy. The woman who'd wanted to go back to school. The woman who'd dreamed of traveling. The woman who'd once had hobbies and interests beyond serving others. I mourned those lost selves. And then I let them go. The next morning, I woke at 5 a.m., showered, and dressed in my new sundress. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked determined. She looked free. She looked dangerous. I loaded my suitcase into my car and drove to the airport. No dramatic goodbyes. No last-minute reconciliations. Just me and the road and the promise of something beautiful waiting at the other end. At the airport, I turned off my phone completely. Whatever messages they were sending, whatever new crisis they'd manufactured, I didn't want to know. I checked my bag, went through security, and sat at the gate watching planes take off. Each one felt like a possibility. Each one felt like escape. The flight to Charleston was smooth. I had a window seat, and as we descended, I saw it for the first time. The coastline, the harbor, the city spreading out in pastel colors beneath me. I pressed my face to the window like a child and felt tears streaming down my cheeks. Not sad tears, something else entirely. The tears of a woman who'd thought she'd never make it this far. The hotel exceeded my expectations. It was a restored historic building in the French Quarter, all exposed brick and original hardwood floors. My room overlooked a courtyard with a fountain, and when I opened the windows, I could smell jasmine and the salt air from the harbor. I unpacked slowly, hanging up my 3 outfits, arranging my toiletries in the bathroom. I was here. I'd actually done it. That first evening, I walked through the historic district as the sun set, painting everything in gold. I ate shrimp and grits at a restaurant with a view of the water. I talked to no one, needed nothing, wanted only what was directly in front of me. I'd spent 52 years being defined by my relationships to other people. Someone's daughter, someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's grandmother. For 7 days, I was going to be just myself, just a woman in Charleston, eating good food and watching the sunset. The waiter brought my check, and I added a generous tip. I'd budgeted carefully, but I could afford to be kind to someone else earning their living. As I walked back to the hotel, my phone buzzed in my purse. I'd turned it back on, curiosity getting the better of me. 17 missed calls, 43 texts. I opened the family group chat, the one I'd forgotten to leave, and scrolled through the messages. They'd gone through the full cycle. Anger at my disappearance, concern that something had happened. Melissa admitting they'd staged the hospital call, Marcus apologizing. Janet suggesting maybe I needed space. Michael saying I was blowing everything out of proportion. And then, this morning, radio silence. They'd realized I was really gone. They'd understood that this time, I wasn't coming back on their terms. I typed one message. I'm in Charleston. I'm safe. I'll contact you when I'm ready. Do not try to reach me. Then I left the group chat and turned the phone off again. Let them sit with their discomfort. Let them experience what it felt like to be dismissed and ignored. Let them wonder if they'd finally pushed too far. I slept that night better than I had in years. The next 6 days passed in a dream. I toured historic mansions and imagined the lives lived within their walls. I walked through the old market and bought myself a pair of earrings I'd never wear, just because they were beautiful. I took a boat tour of the harbor and listened to stories about pirates and Civil War battles. I ate at different restaurants every night, never ordering the cheapest thing on the menu. I gave myself permission to want things. Every morning I woke up and asked myself what I wanted to do that day, not what I should do, not what someone else needed, what I wanted. It was revolutionary. It was terrifying. It was the most alive I'd felt in decades. On the 4th day, I met a woman named Sarah at the Angel Oak Tree. She was about my age, visiting from Boston, and we struck up a conversation about the tree's age and resilience. We ended up spending the afternoon together, talking about our lives over coffee at a cafe in town. Sarah was a retired teacher, divorced, her kids grown and living their own lives. She traveled solo 4 times a year, she told me, had been doing it for 5 years since her retirement. Don't you get lonely? I asked. She smiled. Sometimes. But I was lonelier in my marriage, and I was lonelier when my kids treated my house like a hotel. This kind of lonely is clean, honest. It doesn't ask me to be smaller so someone else can be bigger. Her words hit me like a revelation. Clean loneliness, honest solitude. I'd been so afraid of being alone that I'd accepted being lonely while surrounded by people who claimed to love me. "How did you start?" I asked. "How did you give yourself permission?" "I stopped waiting for permission," she said simply. "I realized that I was going to die someday, and I could either die having lived my life for myself or die having been a supporting character in everyone else's story. That's not really a choice when you think about it." We exchanged numbers before parting, promised to stay in touch. I don't know if we will, but it doesn't matter. She gave me something more valuable than friendship. She gave me a mirror, a reflection of what life could look like on the other side of breaking free. On my last full day in Charleston, I woke early and walked to the Battery as the sun rose over the harbor. I stood there watching the light change, the water shifting from black to silver to gold, and I felt something shift inside me too. Not healing, exactly. Transformation. I pulled out my phone and turned it on for the first time in days. The messages had slowed to a trickle. A few from Melissa, one from Marcus, nothing from the others. I opened Melissa's most recent text. "Mom, I'm sorry. I don't think I understood how much we were asking of you. Can we talk when you get back?" I stared at those words for a long time. Part of me wanted to believe them. Part of me wanted to rush back and smooth things over, to fix the rupture I'd created. But I'd learned something in Charleston. I'd learned that sometimes breaking things is necessary. Sometimes you have to shatter the mold you've been poured into to discover what shape you're actually supposed to be. I typed back, "We can talk, but things are going to be different." I didn't explain what different meant. I didn't make promises or demands. I just stated a fact. We could talk, but the woman who came back from Charleston would not be the woman who left Detroit. That evening, I packed my bag and sat on my hotel room balcony one last time. I'd spent $2,347 to save my own life. Best money I'd ever spent. The flight home the next morning felt different than the flight out. I wasn't escaping anymore. I was returning, but on my own terms, with boundaries I was prepared to defend. When I landed in Detroit, I turned on my phone and saw a text from Marcus. "Welcome home, Ma. Let us know when you're ready." It was the first time any of them had acknowledged that the timing was mine to control. Small progress, but progress nonetheless. I drove to my apartment and sat in the parking lot for a moment before going inside. The building looked the same, but I was different. I'd proven to myself that I could choose me. I'd proven that the world didn't end when I prioritized my own needs. I'd proven that I was more than just what I could do for other people. And that knowledge was armor. That knowledge was power. That knowledge was freedom. The first week back was strange. I returned to work at the warehouse, and my co-workers noticed something different about me. "You look good," my supervisor said. "Really rested." I smiled and said nothing. How could I explain that I'd found myself in Charleston, that I'd learned what it felt like to be whole? The family reached out tentatively. Melissa called and asked if she could come over. I said yes, but I chose the time and I chose the location. A coffee shop near my apartment, neutral territory with a built-in time limit. She showed up looking nervous, which was a new dynamic. Usually, I was the one afraid of disappointing her. "I've been thinking," she started, then stopped. "Actually, I've been in therapy." Derek suggested it after I told him about everything that happened. I waited, saying nothing, let her fill the silence. "The therapist asked me to track how often I asked you for help versus how often I offered help to you. The ratio was..." She laughed, but it sounded painful. "Pretty bad, Mom. Really bad." $18,000 worth of childcare in the past year, I said quietly. I calculated it. She flinched. "I didn't realize. I knew we asked you a lot, but I didn't think about it in those terms. You're my mom. You always said you loved spending time with the kids." I do love spending time with them, I said, when it's my choice, when I'm invited, not commanded. When you ask instead of assuming. I'm sorry. The words came out soft, almost a whisper. I'm so sorry, Mom. We took advantage of you. I took advantage of you. And that thing with the hospital call? I don't even know who that person was. I was so angry that you weren't doing what I wanted that I became someone I don't recognize. I'd prepared myself for this conversation. I'd rehearsed boundaries and ultimatums. But sitting across from my daughter, seeing genuine remorse in her eyes, I felt something unexpected. Not forgiveness exactly. Too soon for that. But possibility. The possibility that this could be repaired if we both did the work. I need you to understand something, I said. Charleston wasn't about punishing you. It was about remembering that I'm a person, that I have wants and needs and dreams that matter. For years, I forgot that. I let you all forget it too. That's partly my fault. I trained you to treat me this way. No, Melissa said firmly. Don't do that. Don't take responsibility for our behavior. We're adults. We should have known better. It was the first time I'd heard her take full accountability without deflection or excuse. It felt like a gift. We talked for 2 hours. Not about Charleston, but about everything else. About her childhood, about the divorce, about the ways we'd both been damaged by Tom's abandonment and had replicated those patterns in different ways. About how she'd learned from watching him that love was transactional, that people were valued for what they provided, not for who they were. I don't want to be like him, she said, her eyes wet. I don't want Emma and Connor to grow up thinking that's what family looks like. Then we change it, I said, starting now. But Melissa, I need you to understand. I'm not going back to the way things were. I will help with the kids when I can and when I want to. But I will also take trips, pursue hobbies, build a life that's mine. And sometimes the answer will be no. She nodded. I understand, and I'll talk to Marcus and the others. We need to have a family meeting about this. No, I said. I'll talk to them myself, each of them, individually. What I need from each relationship is different, and I'm not negotiating with a committee anymore. She looked surprised, then nodded slowly. Okay, that's fair. When we parted, she hugged me, and for the first time in years, it felt like she was hugging me as an equal, not as a resource. Small progress, but progress. Over the next month, I had similar conversations with each family member. Marcus was defensive at first, but Karen had apparently also started therapy and backed me up. They agreed to hire a regular babysitter and ask me only for special occasions, with advance notice. Janet struggled the most. She couldn't understand why I was making such a big deal out of family helping family. But even she eventually agreed to respect my boundaries, if only to keep the peace. Michael. I cut off completely. He'd sent me a long email blaming me for being dramatic and selfish, and I realized I didn't need that energy in my life. I blocked him and felt nothing but relief. Some relationships can't be salvaged. Some people are so invested in the role you play that they can't accept you as a full person. That's their limitation, not your failure. As spring turned to summer, I built a new life. I kept the warehouse job but quit looking for extra hours. Instead, I joined a book club at the library. I started taking a watercolor class on Thursday evenings. I began planning my next trip, Santa Fe in the fall. I opened a separate savings account I called my Freedom Fund. Every paycheck, I put $50 into it before I paid any bills. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And it was growing. The grandkids came over one Saturday in June, and I actually enjoyed it. Really, genuinely enjoyed it, in a way I hadn't in years, because I'd chosen to have them, because Melissa had asked a week in advance, sent me a text. Would you be available to have Emma and Connor over next Saturday? I'd love to stay, and we could spend time together. The difference in that phrasing, asking instead of assuming, offering her own presence instead of dumping and running, felt revolutionary. When they arrived, Emma launched herself at me with her usual enthusiasm, but this time I was rested enough to catch her properly, to swing her around and hear her laugh. Connor, always more reserved, gave me a shy smile and showed me his new book about dinosaurs. We settled on the floor to read it together, and I realized this was the first time in months I'd been with them without feeling resentful, without counting the minutes until they left. Because when Connor spilled juice on my floor, bright red cranberry juice that spread across my worn linoleum like blood, I didn't have to clean it up alone. Melissa was there, jumping up immediately, grabbing paper towels, apologizing, treating my space with respect. "I'm so sorry, Mom. Connor, buddy, we need to be more careful at Grandma's house." She cleaned it thoroughly, checked to make sure the stain was gone, then actually thanked me for being understanding. Such a small thing, but it felt like evidence of a shifting universe. "Grandma, did you really block all of us?" Emma asked later while we colored together at the kitchen table. Her question was matter-of-fact, curious rather than accusatory. The simple directness of children, cutting through all the adult pretense and getting straight to the truth. "I did," I said honestly, keeping my eyes on the purple crayon I was using to fill in a butterfly wing. "I needed some space to think." "Mommy said we made you sad." I looked up at Melissa, who was watching us carefully from where she stood by the sink. Her expression was open, vulnerable, giving me permission to be honest. "You did make me sad," I told Emma, choosing my words carefully. "But we're working on being better to each other. Sometimes families make mistakes, but if everyone tries hard, you can fix it." Emma considered this with the seriousness that 6-year-olds bring to important truths. Like when I was mean to Connor and we didn't talk, and then we said sorry and now we're friends again? "Exactly like that," I said, and felt my throat tighten. "Exactly like that, sweetheart." She nodded, satisfied, then went back to coloring her rainbow. The simple wisdom of children, accepting and moving forward without carrying grudges or maintaining grievances. If only adults could do the same. Later, after they left, I stood in my apartment and realized it felt different. Less like a way station, more like a home. I'd bought a new couch with my tax return. I'd hung artwork on the walls, prints from local artists I'd discovered at a street fair. I'd painted the bathroom a soft blue that reminded me of the Charleston harbor. Small changes, but each one was a declaration: I live here. This space is mine. I matter. In July, Sarah from Charleston called me. We'd been texting occasionally, and she asked if I wanted to meet up in Savannah for a weekend. She'd be driving down from Boston, could easily extend her trip. I said yes without hesitation. We spent 3 days exploring historic squares, eating at restaurants, talking about everything and nothing. We weren't best friends. We might never be. But we were fellow travelers, women who'd learned the same hard lessons and were building similar lives on the other side. "I'm proud of you," she said on our last night, over wine at a rooftop bar. "It's not easy what you did. Standing up to family, choosing yourself. Most people never do it." "I almost didn't," I admitted. "I came so close to canceling Charleston and staying home." "But you didn't. That's what matters. You jumped and you survived the fall, and now you know you can do it again." She was right. I'd proved to myself that I could choose me and the world wouldn't end. That knowledge was transformative. It meant that every future choice came from strength, not fear. When I got back to Detroit, I found a letter in my mailbox. Marcus had written me a 3-page apology, detailing all the ways he'd taken me for granted and outlining concrete changes he was making. He'd hired a regular sitter for date nights. He'd started a college fund for the kids so they wouldn't have to rely on family guilt for financial help. He'd begun therapy to work on his entitlement issues. I cried reading it. Not sad tears. Proud tears. My children were doing the work. They were growing. And maybe, just maybe, We could build something healthier from the rubble of what had broken. But I also knew that even if they didn't change, I would be okay. Charleston had taught me that my worth wasn't dependent on their validation. I'd learned to validate myself. That was the real victory, the real transformation. Not that they'd apologized, but that I no longer needed the apology to know I'd been right. August brought my 53rd birthday. In the past, birthdays had been obligations, family dinners where I cooked and cleaned and made sure everyone else had a good time. This year, I rented a cabin in the Upper Peninsula for a long weekend. I told my family about it 2 weeks in advance, made it clear I was going alone, and asked them not to call unless it was an emergency. Then I drove north to the shores of Lake Superior and spent 3 days reading, hiking, and watching the water. On my actual birthday, I woke up alone in the cabin, made myself coffee, and sat on the porch watching the sunrise. I thought about all the birthdays I'd spent catering to others, all the celebrations that had been about everyone but me. And I felt something I'd never felt on my birthday before: complete contentment. I didn't need a party. I didn't need gifts or attention or validation. I had myself, and that was enough. That evening I called Melissa. "Happy birthday." "Mom," she said, her voice warm. "How's the cabin?" "Perfect," I said. "Absolutely perfect. The kids made you cards. We'll mail them." "I'd like that." A pause, then, "Mom, thank you." "For what?" "For teaching us this, for showing us that you can't pour from an empty cup. I'm trying to teach Emma that now. She doesn't have to make everyone happy. She just has to be herself." My throat tightened. That's the best gift you could give her. After we hung up, I sat on the porch until the stars came out, watching the Milky Way stretch across the sky in a way it never did in Detroit. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, trapped and exhausted and slowly dying inside. And I thought about the woman I was becoming, still learning, still growing, but fundamentally free. The journey wasn't over. There would be backsliding, new boundary violations to address, moments of doubt. But I'd proven to myself that I could do hard things, that I could choose myself even when it cost me, that I could rebuild my life from the ground up and create something beautiful. Charleston had been the beginning, not the end. The real work was here, in the daily choices to honor my own needs, to maintain my boundaries, to keep building a life that felt authentic and true. By fall, the family dynamics had settled into a new normal. Melissa and I had lunch once a month, just the two of us. I watched the grandkids every other Saturday afternoon, a schedule we'd agreed on in advance. Marcus called weekly to check in, not to ask for favors. Janet and I were cordial but distant. She'd never fully accepted the changes, but she'd stopped actively fighting them. I'd taken on a new role at the warehouse, a small promotion with better hours and slightly higher pay. It wasn't my dream job, but it was stable, and it gave me the flexibility to pursue my actual dreams outside of work. I'd signed up for a writing class and had started working on a memoir about my journey. Not for publication, just for me. A record of the transformation. In October, I flew to Santa Fe. This time, the family's response was different. Melissa helped me research hotels. Marcus gave me a list of restaurants his friend had recommended. Even Janet sent a text wishing me a good trip. No guilt. No manipulation. Just support. Santa Fe was different from Charleston. All adobe and high desert light, but equally transformative. I took a painting workshop and discovered I had a decent eye for color. I hiked in the mountains and felt my lungs expand with the thin air. I ate green chile on everything and browsed galleries where art sold for more than my annual salary. One afternoon, I was sitting in the plaza, sketching in a notebook I'd bought, when an older woman sat down next to me. She was probably in her 70s, wearing turquoise jewelry and a flowing skirt. "Is this your first time in Santa Fe?" she asked. I nodded. "It shows," she said, smiling. "You have that look, that wonder." What look do I have after I've been here a while? Contentment. You'll see. This place changes you if you let it. We talked for an hour. Her name was Elena, and she'd moved to Santa Fe 20 years ago after her husband died. She'd left everything familiar in Ohio and rebuilt her life from scratch. "Weren't you scared?" I asked. "Terrified," she admitted. "But I was more scared of dying without ever having lived. Fear is just information. It tells you that something matters. What you do with that information is the important part." She gave me her number and invited me to a women's art collective that met weekly. I almost said no, that I was only visiting, but then I stopped myself. "I'll be back," I said instead. "I'll come to Santa Fe again, and when I do, I'll look you up." She smiled like she knew something I didn't. "Yes," she said, "you will." On my last night in Santa Fe, I treated myself to an expensive dinner at a restaurant with a view of the mountains. I ordered the chef's tasting menu, paired wines I couldn't pronounce, and sat alone at a table for two, completely at peace with my own company. The waiter brought the check, and I looked at the total: $273 for one meal. A year ago, that would have filled me with guilt. It could have been groceries for 2 weeks, gas money, a contribution to someone else's emergency fund. But tonight, it was an investment in my own joy, my own pleasure, my own sense that I deserved beautiful things. I paid it without hesitation and left a generous tip. Walking back to my hotel through the lamplit streets, I felt something settle in my chest. Not happiness, exactly. Something deeper. Rightness. The sense that I was finally living my own life, making my own choices, becoming the person I was always meant to be. When I got home to Detroit, I found my apartment exactly as I'd left it. No one had used my space as a storage unit or borrowed my car without asking. My boundaries were holding. I unpacked slowly, savoring the ritual, hanging my new Santa Fe painting on the wall across from my Charleston print. A gallery of transformations, a map of my becoming. That night I called Melissa. "I'm home. How was it?" "Perfect. Different from Charleston, but just as good." "I'm glad, Mom. You sound happy." I considered that. Was I happy? The question felt too simple for what I was experiencing. I was complex. I was contradictory. I was grieving the lost years while celebrating the found ones. I was healing and still wounded. I was free and still learning what freedom meant. "I'm becoming," I said finally. "I'm becoming who I was always supposed to be." Melissa was quiet for a moment. "I think I understand that." Maybe she did. Maybe my transformation was giving her permission to pursue her own. Maybe watching me choose myself was teaching my children and grandchildren that they were allowed to do the same. Legacy isn't always about what you give up for the next generation. Sometimes it's about what you show them is possible. The holidays approached, and with them, the old anxieties. Christmas had always been my responsibility. The cooking, the cleaning, the gift buying, the coordinating. I'd spent decades making magic for everyone else while running myself ragged. This year, in November, I sent a group text to the family. "I'm happy to host Christmas dinner, but I need help. If you want to come, you need to contribute a dish, help with setup and cleanup, and bring your own gifts. I'm not doing everything anymore." The responses came quickly. Melissa volunteered to bring ham. Marcus said he'd handle desserts. Even Janet agreed to make her famous sweet potato casserole. Karen offered to come early to help cook and stay late to clean. It was such a small thing, sharing the labor of a holiday, but it represented a seismic shift in our family dynamic. They were finally seeing me as a person who deserved support, not just a service provider. Christmas Day was different than any I'd experienced. The apartment was full, but I wasn't exhausted. I sat at my own table, eating food I'd only partially prepared, and watched my family laugh and talk and exist together without me having to orchestrate every moment. Emma crawled into my lap after dinner. "Grandma, Mommy said you went to 2 trips this year." "I did," I said. "Where did you go?" "Charleston and Santa Fe." "Are you going more places?" "I am. I'm planning a trip to Portland for the spring." "Can I come sometime?" I looked at Melissa, who nodded slightly. "Maybe when you're a little older," I said. "But I'd like that. I'd like to show you the world. Emma smiled and snuggled closer. I want to be like you when I grow up. Mommy says you're brave. I felt tears prick my eyes. Not sad tears. The other kind. The kind that comes when you realize you've broken a generational curse, when you understand that your struggle has given the next generation a different template. You can be braver than me, I told Emma. You can start earlier. You don't have to wait until you're 52 to choose yourself. After everyone left, I cleaned up with Karen's help, and we talked while we washed dishes. I owe you an apology, she said, for the anniversary cruise thing. We were wrong to assume. We were wrong about a lot of things. Thank you, I said simply. Marcus has changed a lot since all of this happened. He's been more present with the kids, more helpful around the house. I think watching you set boundaries made him realize he needed to do the same with work, with his parents, with me. You kind of started a revolution in our family. I laughed. I was just trying to go to Charleston. Sometimes that's all it takes. One person saying enough is enough. That night, alone in my apartment, I looked around at my life. It wasn't perfect. I still worked at a warehouse. I still lived in a small apartment. I still had limited income and uncertain prospects. But I'd reclaimed my autonomy. I'd proven to myself that I could choose me. And that made all the difference. I thought about Clara's story, about all the women who'd been trapped in similar dynamics. The grandmothers, mothers, daughters who'd been trained to sacrifice themselves on the altar of family obligation. I wanted to tell them what I'd learned. I wanted to share the wisdom I'd bought with so much pain. Here's what I know now, what I wish someone had told me decades ago. When people treat you like you exist only to serve them, that's not love, that's exploitation. Real love wants you to thrive, not just survive. Real love celebrates your joy, not just your usefulness. Watch for the signs. When people only call when they need something. When your plans are always the ones that get canceled. When you can't remember the last time someone asked how you're doing and actually listened to the answer. When guilt is the primary tool used to motivate your compliance. These are warning signs that your relationships have become transactional, that you've been reduced to a role rather than honored as a person. Gaslighting is real, and it's insidious. When people tell you you're being selfish for having needs, when they rewrite history to make you the villain, when they suggest that wanting basic respect means something is wrong with you, that's psychological abuse. Trust your perceptions. Document patterns. Your reality is valid even when others deny it. Setting boundaries doesn't make you selfish. It makes you healthy. And yes, people will react badly at first. They'll punish you with silence or guilt or anger. They'll escalate before they accept. That's normal. It doesn't mean you're wrong. It means they're adjusting to a new reality where they can't control you. Hold firm. Financial independence is crucial. Even if it's just a small savings account they don't know about, even if it's maintaining your own credit, even if it's keeping one skill that could support you if you needed to leave. Economic dependence is how many people get trapped in exploitative relationships. Protect your ability to survive without them. You don't owe anyone your unhappiness. Not your children, not your siblings, not your parents. Being family doesn't give someone the right to consume your life. You're allowed to have boundaries with blood relatives. You're allowed to choose your own life, even if it disappoints them. And here's the hardest truth. Some relationships can't be saved. Some people are so invested in the version of you that serves them that they'll never accept the authentic you. That's painful, but it's not your failure. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. For those wondering how to start, begin small. Say no to one request. Take yourself out to dinner alone. Open that separate savings account. Join that class you've been eyeing. Book that trip, even if it's just a weekend somewhere nearby. Each small act of choosing yourself builds the muscle you'll need for bigger acts of self-determination. And for those who are thinking, but I'm too old to start over, let me tell you, I'm 53. I've been trapped for 30 years. I started making changes less than a year ago, and my whole life has transformed. It's never too late. You're never too old. You always have time to become who you were meant to be. The world tells women, especially older women, that we should be grateful for whatever scraps of respect we receive, that we should be endlessly giving, endlessly accommodating, endlessly available, that our value lies in our usefulness to others. That's a lie designed to exploit us. Your value is intrinsic. You matter because you exist, not because of what you do for others. Charleston taught me that. Or maybe I taught myself that, and Charleston was just the classroom. Either way, I learned that I could choose myself and survive the fallout. I learned that the people who truly love me would adjust to my boundaries. I learned that the ones who wouldn't adjust weren't really loving me anyway. They were loving what I did for them. That's a hard lesson, realizing some relationships were never what you thought they were. But it's also freeing. Once you know the truth, you can stop fighting for connections that were always one-sided. So here I am, nearly a year after that first blocked call, that first boundary, that first time I chose myself over family obligation. My life isn't dramatically different on the surface. I'm still in Detroit, still working at the warehouse, still navigating relationships with imperfect family members. But internally, everything has changed. I wake up each morning and check in with myself first. What do I need today? What do I want? How can I honor my own needs while still being present for people I love? It's a daily practice, this balance between connection and autonomy. Some days I get it right. Some days I slide back into old patterns of overgiving. But even on the hard days, I know what I know now. I matter. My life has value beyond what I provide for others. I deserve rest, joy, beauty, adventure, peace. I'm planning my next trip for spring Portland, like I told Emma. I'm saving money in my Freedom Fund. I'm taking my watercolor class and writing my memoir. I'm building a life that feels like mine. And my family is learning to respect that. Not perfectly, not all of them, not all the time. But enough. Progress, not perfection. The grandkids came over last weekend, and Emma asked me to tell her about Charleston. So I pulled out my photo album, the physical one I'd made, and we went through it together. I told her about the historic houses and the angel oak tree and the shrimp and grits. I told her about Sarah and Elena and all the women I'd met who were building lives on their own terms. "Were you scared?" she asked. "Terrified," I admitted. But I was more scared of never going. Fear is just information, sweetheart. It tells you that something matters. What you do with that information is the important part. She considered this with the seriousness of a 6-year-old. "I think you're really brave, Grandma." "I think you will be too," I told her. "Even braver, because you're learning young that you matter." After they left, I sat in my apartment and felt grateful, not for the suffering that brought me here, but for the strength I'd found on the other side of it. Not for the exploitation I'd endured, but for the wisdom I'd earned by finally saying enough. This is my story, the story of how I saved 3 months for a trip and found my whole self in the process. The story of how my family tried to trap me with babysitting and I chose freedom instead. The story of how I learned that choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. It's sacred. It's the foundation on which everything else must be built. I know some of you listening have similar stories, similar struggles. You're trapped in dynamics that are slowly killing you, wondering if you're crazy for wanting more, afraid of the consequences of standing up for yourself. You're questioning whether you have the right to prioritize your own happiness and well-being. I see you. I was you. And I want you to know, you can do this. You can choose yourself. You can set boundaries and survive the fallout. You can build a life that honors your intrinsic worth, not just your utility to others. It won't be easy. There will be guilt and grief and moments when you question everything. There will be people who never forgive you for refusing to be who they needed you to be. But there will also be sunrise over Charleston Harbor. There will also be new friends who see you as a whole person. There will also be mornings when you wake up in your own life and feel nothing but gratitude for your own courage. That's worth everything. That's worth the fight. So if you're wondering whether to book that trip, take that class, say that no, Set that boundary. Do it. Choose yourself. The world won't end. Your real relationships will survive and strengthen. And you'll discover what I discovered. That you've always been enough. You've always been worthy. You've always deserved to take up space and pursue joy and live a life that feels authentically and completely like yours. You deserve to be more than a supporting character in someone else's story. Now I want to hear from you. Where are you listening from? What city? What time zone? What corner of the world? Drop it in the comments below. And if you've ever been trapped in a similar situation, if you've ever had to choose yourself over family obligation, tell me about it. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have gone to Charleston? Would you have blocked your family? Would you have handled it differently? Hit that like button if you think I made the right choice. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about finding yourself on the other side of exploitation. And check out the 2 videos on your screen about family dynamics and boundary setting. Until the next story, remember, you matter. Not because of what you do for others, but because you exist. Take care of your heart, and don't be afraid to choose yourself. You're worth it.